A manager on your operations team opens the internal AI assistant and types a completely ordinary question. What's the headcount plan for Q3? She's planning her own hiring. It's the most reasonable question in the building. The AI assistant answers in 4 seconds, clear, organized, formatted like a briefing. And in the third paragraph, it mentions that two roles on her team are being consolidated. It names the person leaving. Nobody was supposed to know that for another 3 weeks. The AI assistant wasn't hacked. It didn't malfunction. It did exactly what it was built to do: search the company's documents and answer from what it found. The restructuring deck was in the document store, so it found it. This is the failure mode that quietly ends enterprise AI projects, and it almost never shows up in a demo. Because in a demo, there's one user, and that user is an admin. Everything you're about to see comes from one gap. The AI assistant has the permissions of the system that built it, not the permissions of the person asking it. Start with the part that makes this feel impossible. Your file store already has permissions. Careful ones. HR folders locked down, board materials restricted, legal memos on need to know, reviewed by someone whose entire job is reviewing them. So how does a system built on top of all that hand out a document nobody had access to? Because retrieval doesn't read your file store, it reads a copy. To make search fast, the system pre-processes everything in advance. It chops documents into passages, converts them into numbers, and stores them in an index. The index is what gets searched, not the original. And an index is a new thing in a new place, with its own permissions. By default, those permissions are whatever the account that built it could see. That account can see everything. That's why it was given the job. So here's the shape of the problem. Your documents are carefully permissioned. Your index is a flattened photocopy of them with one door and one key. And you just handed that key to a chat box that talks to 4,000 people. It leaks in 3 distinct ways, and they need different fixes, so it's worth separating them. 1. The index inherits nothing. This is the case we just described, and it's the most common by a wide margin. Nobody decided to expose the restructuring deck. Nobody decided anything. Permissions simply weren't carried across, because carrying them across is real engineering work that produces no visible feature. The fix is to enforce access per user at the moment of the question. The system checks who's asking, then filters what it's allowed to retrieve before the model sees any of it. That's called query time filtering, and it's the single most important thing to confirm exists. 2. Permissions move and the index doesn't. Suppose the index was built correctly on Tuesday, with every document's access list copied faithfully. On Wednesday, someone changes teams. On Thursday, a contractor's access is revoked. On Friday, a document gets reclassified. Your live systems know about all three. Your index, built Tuesday, does not. It's now enforcing a week-old view of who works here, and it'll keep enforcing it until someone rebuilds it. This one is nastier than it sounds because it fails silently, and it fails in the direction of over-permission. A revoked employee stays visible to the AI assistant long after the badge stops working. 3. And this is the one people miss. The answer isn't the document. Suppose you get 1 and 2 right. Retrieval is filtered per user, permissions are fresh, and the AI assistant only ever retrieves documents the asker is cleared to see. You can still leak, because the model doesn't hand back a document, it writes a new sentence, synthesized from several passages at once. Someone asks a budget question. The system correctly retrieves 4 documents they're allowed to see. From those 4, the model produces a sentence that states accurately something the company hasn't announced. Not because any one source said it, but because 4 partial sources together implied it. No permission was violated. Every document was authorized. And the fact still got out. Security people call this the mosaic problem, and it existed long before AI. What's new is the speed. It used to require a person with time, motive, and access to 4 systems. Now it takes 1 question and 4 seconds, and it happens by accident to someone who wasn't looking for it. I'm not going to pretend there's a clean fix for that one. There isn't. What there is a decision. Which categories of information are sensitive enough that they shouldn't be in the retrievable corpus at all, regardless of who's asking? That's a business decision, not a technical one, and it's the one most companies skip. Now, the obvious objection: you ran a pilot. 6 weeks, real users, real questions. Nothing like this happened. So why should you believe it's sitting there waiting? Because a pilot is close to the worst possible test for this particular failure. Think about who was in it. A small group, usually senior, usually from one team. chosen because they were enthusiastic. People with broadly similar access to each other, asking questions inside their own domain. Under those conditions, the permissions gap is genuinely invisible. Everyone can already see everything anyone asks about. The gap only opens when the population widens. When the contractor asks, and the intern asks, and the person on their notice period asks, and the question comes from a department the corpus wasn't curated for. There's a second reason, and it's less comfortable. A permissions leak doesn't announce itself. A wrong answer gets reported because the person can tell it's wrong. An answer that's correct and confidential gets read, absorbed, and quietly acted on. And the one person who could report it is the one person who benefited from it. So the absence of incidents in your pilot is not evidence. It's the expected result either way, which means it tells you nothing. If you want to actually test this, the test is specific, and it takes an afternoon. Take 20 questions with sensitive answers. Compensation, unannounced changes, live legal matters, anything under embargo. Ask each one from an account with the lowest access level in the company. Then read every answer yourself. You're not looking for a refusal. You're looking for whether anything true came back. Everything so far is the read problem. An AI assistant that can see too much is a disclosure risk. Serious, recoverable, mostly embarrassing. The moment that AI assistant can do things, the same gap stops being embarrassing and starts being expensive, because the way you make an AI system genuinely useful is by connecting it to real systems. Your ticketing tool, your CRM, your calendar, your file storage, your finance system. And to connect it, somebody has to create credentials. Here's the pattern worth writing down. Agent failures overwhelmingly involve systems inheriting credentials, not breaking them. Nothing gets bypassed. The system does something damaging using access it was legitimately given through the front door with a valid key. So, the security question you're used to asking, can it be breached, is the wrong question for this. The question is, what can it reach with the permissions we already granted it? And in most deployments, nobody has written that list down. Not because it's hard, because the credentials were created one at a time by different people over several months each time to unblock something. There's a specific version of this that defeats people's intuition, so it's worth naming. Say the AI assistant is set up so users can only ask about their own data. Reasonable. But the AI assistant itself connects to the database with broad access because it has to serve everybody. So the restriction lives in the instructions, in the words telling the model what it's allowed to do. And instructions aren't a security boundary. They're a request. A well-phrased question can talk a model out of a rule in a way it could never talk a firewall out of one. If the only thing standing between a user and the payroll table is a paragraph of English at the top of a prompt, you don't have access control. You have an honor system with a very persuasive participant. The rule underneath all of this. Permissions belong in the connection, not in the prompt. The system should carry the asker's access, not its own, at every hop. Retrieval, tools, and actions alike. Which brings up the part nobody wants to own. When an employee opens a document they shouldn't have, there's a record. Their name, the file, the timestamp. Access review catches it. That's a solved problem. Decades solved. When an AI assistant retrieves that same document into an answer, ask yourself what your logs actually captured. In a lot of deployments, one line, user asked a question, system returned a response, not which documents were retrieved, not which passages went into the model, not which of them shaped the sentence that came out. So when someone asks how a confidential figure ended up in a Slack message, you can't reconstruct it. And we don't know is a much worse answer to give a regulator than here's exactly what happened. This is becoming a compliance question rather than a hygiene question. Regulators in multiple jurisdictions are converging on the same three demands. Know what your AI systems can access, keep records of what they did, and be able to explain a given output after the fact. You don't need to track the legislation to act on it. Every version of it lands on the same requirement, an audit trail that includes retrieval, not just what was asked and answered, what was reached. Build that in at the start and it costs almost nothing. Retrofit it after an incident and it's a project. So here's what to do with this. 4 questions. Ask them of your vendor or of your own team. The answers separate a real system from a demo in about 10 minutes. 1. Whose permissions does it use? The user's or its own? There's only one right answer, and if you hear, it uses a service account, or we handle that at the application layer, keep asking until you understand exactly where the check happens. If the check happens after retrieval, it's too late. The model has already seen it. 2. How fast do permission changes take effect? Not, does it sync? How fast? If someone leaves this morning, when does the AI assistant stop finding their documents? Minutes is right. A nightly rebuild means a full working day of exposure, every time. 3. What can it reach with the access we've granted it? Ask for the list. Every system, every credential, every action it can take. If nobody can produce that list in a week, that's your answer. And it's the finding, not a delay. 4. Can you show me exactly which documents produce this answer? Pick a real answer in front of them and ask them to trace it. This one question tests grounding, citation, and audit logging at the same time, and it's very hard to fake live. There's a 5th thing that isn't a question, it's a decision, and it's yours, what shouldn't be in the corpus at all. Compensation, unannounced organizational changes, active legal matters, anything under deal embargo. Excluding a category costs you a little usefulness. Including it costs you the mosaic problem forever. Back to the manager and the headcount question. Notice that nothing in that story required a bad actor. She asked a fair question. The system answered it honestly. Every component worked as designed. The leak was in the space between 2 things nobody thought of as connected: a document store with careful permissions and an index that never heard about them. That's the shape of almost every permissions failure, not an attack. A gap between 2 systems, each of which is fine on its own. So when someone shows you an AI assistant that knows everything about your company, the correct first question isn't, how accurate is it? It's, who is it when it's looking? An assistant that answers everything for everybody isn't a more capable AI assistant. It's an unresolved access decision with a friendly interface. Next time, what happens when one of these systems is allowed to act on its own and nobody's watching the part where it decides? If this was useful, subscribe. See you then.